Oh. Hi. Just gonna add Courtney in the chat. Hope everyone's good. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good, thanks. I'm loving the braids.
Oh, thank you. Just in
They're
my
very
own doing.
cute. Good. You know what? Sometimes you have to learn how to do your hair and you just have to fight for it. But
Exactly.
we get there, we
Totally.
get there. How have you
Yeah.
been?
Yeah, I've been good. Yeah, just yeah, sort of since the whole protest and everything, just had quite a few sort of work opportunities and stuff. So I've just been, yeah, just been busy. So it's been good. How have you been?
That's good. Been yeah, just pretty hectic and been busy, just working, parenting, and doing all this stuff. But yeah,
Right.
it's been like an overwhelming response, but I've been really happy with it, and it's good that
Yeah.
everyone's listening, and everyone's trying to like be proactive, which is good.
Yeah, totally.
What kind of jobs have you been offered, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, just I've been offered like a commission for like 2022 with Edinburgh University actually. My
Wow, that's good.
sort of put on something with them about the sort of exhibition, like a sort of exhibition about the sort of slave trade and stuff like
Hmm.
that. So yeah, so it should be interesting. And I'm also going to be performing at the Black Lives Matter in Fife as well.
Okay,
So yeah, quite a few things lined up. But
that's
yeah,
really
we'll
good.
see.
Keep up the good
Yeah.
work because you're
Oh,
doing amazing things.
thank
But
you.
yeah. So basically, just introduce yourself really quickly for the viewers and let them know who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so my name's Courtney Stoddard. I'm a poet and performer based in Edinburgh. Most of my work focuses on sort of racial injustice, racial trauma, sort of based on my own experiences, but also sort of experiences of those around me, things that I've read, things I've researched. So yeah.
Mm. Good, good, good. And yeah, so today, guys, we're going to talk about being mixed race, growing up in Scotland with that heritage, and Courtney's poetry and performing arts. And we're also going to discuss your dissertation that you did at Edinburgh
Mm,
Uni on Sheku Bayoh, which is what that I think that touches quite close to everyone in Scotland, especially the Black community, because every time we discuss racism and if we like show people videos of what goes on in America, they're like, but it doesn't happen here, like
yeah,
it's not a thing. And then we've got, well, actually this guy died. Like it's not a thing of like you should be
exactly.
proud, but we have proof. Like we have
Hmm.
actual like evidence that it happened, and I remember it happening so well. It was only 5 years
Yeah,
ago anyway.
so
But
did I. Definitely.
yeah, that was a weird one. But yeah, once we get to that, we'll like talk about it. So just on basics, where are you actually from? Like, where's your ancestral heritage from?
Yeah, so I'm born and bred Edinburgh, but my mum, so my dad's white. He's quite a mix actually, sort of Scottish, French, Irish. My
Mm,
mum is half Bayesian, so Barbados, and half
yeah.
Trinidadian. But my mum was adopted by a white family, so I never really grew up with that kind of influence of
Hmm.
being, my sort of black side of me, if you will.
Yeah.
I didn't get to kind of experience that.
Hmm.
I didn't grow up with a sort of Caribbean granny or anything like that, so I kind of very much identified with being Scottish because I'm not bicultural, I'm monocultural. That is it.
Yeah.
The Scottish culture is my culture. It's the only culture I know.
Mm. Have you managed to kind of like get in touch with your Caribbean side? Have you managed to like how have you kind of taught that to yourself and adapted that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing was, growing up, I was always, people used to say to me, you're black," and I was like, I know I look it, but like I don't have anything to kind of back that up. I didn't have a sort of another culture to be proud of, or even to be ashamed of, or even anything. I didn't
Hmm.
have anything. As I got older, my mum eventually got in touch with her biological mum, but it just didn't work out. I think
Hmm.
these things can be very challenging.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until I was probably about 2021 and I really started to research. I
Hmm.
started to read into sort of the history of Africa, the history of the slave trade, so many different sort of points of history. And I started to look into the sort of sociological aspect of sort of, you know, how racism is internalized and all that kind of stuff. So that really kind of was a bit of an awakening for me, because I began to realize like, oh, like so many things that I've experienced are actually related to my ethnicity, are related to the color of my skin. Whereas before I just kind of thought, oh, you know, I feel like people are a bit funny with me sometimes, or, you know, like my friends get treated in a different way than I do. And I really internalized it as being my fault. And I thought there was just something intrinsically wrong with me, rather than it being, you know, a sort of a more of a systematic social issue. I very much from a young age internalized as, no, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah, and do you feel like it came from both sides, or do you feel like it was just maybe from the white side or the black side? Like how did it go about?
Yeah, I mean, well, I was never around black people. I was, you know, I did not grow up around black people at all. So I never experienced sort of like colorism in the black community or any of that kind of stuff, because, you know, I wasn't around it. You know, Scotland is very, very white. So I had no kind of reference point for that. So it was very much kind of racism from white peers was, you know, at points it was relentless. It was really, really difficult. Primary school, got called all sorts of names, comments made about my hair, you know, and then sort of throughout high school as well. I mean, I never had any real friends who were not white or Asian till I think I was about 15, and I changed schools, and I all of a sudden had these two mixed race friends, and I was like, oh my god, like this is, you know, this is something completely new for me. I didn't grow up around black people, so it was very much racism from my white peer group, for the most part, that I experienced.
Yeah. And have you enjoyed finding your black culture? Like, how have you found it? Like, I think because I'm so used to just being around it, so how has it been having to like discover that yourself, and how have you experienced it?
Yeah, so I mean, it was traumatic. Initially, it was because it was like a total paradigm shift. I had to really transform the way that I saw the world, and saw myself moving within that world. I had a complete sort of paradigm shift within my mind. And I mean, I was very depressed for a long time after I sort of realized how messed up the world was. You know, I mean, for a good couple of years I was, you know, probably just a misery, like, you know, not enjoyable to be around, because I had to sort of reshift so much stuff in sort of how I saw myself. And yeah, it was really difficult, but then since then I've found solace within that, because I feel empowered now, because no matter how messed up the world is, I want to know what's going on. It's that whole knowledge is power thing. It's like, no matter what you're dealing with, at least if you know what it is, then you can, you know, take steps to at least try and transform that.
Yeah, I think that's a really weird thing that everyone's going through the same thing right now, like with the whole George Floyd thing coming up, and there's so much more being like released about like microaggressions and systematic racism, that everyone is actually going through their lives again as like black people, mixed race people, Asians, whoever, like, and you're actually being like, so when that teacher said something to me, that wasn't actually just them being a teacher, it was more that they're biased behind it. And it's that reopening of like trauma that we're all going through. And I think as a black community, it's been a very hard, like June was a tough month for everyone.
Definitely.
And it was a constant cycle of like, even if it wasn't one thing, you didn't see something online, or you'd hear someone talking about it, or even just like, it's weird that it's one of those things of, when even after the protesting and stuff like, it's one of those things when people see you in the street, they don't know how to actually interact. And it's that now, like, it's like, I get it that being cautious or whatever, but at the same time it's a bit like, hi, like, can we say hi to you and stuff like that? And I'm like, just treat us like normal people. Like, that's literally, that's it. Like, even just being hesitant to us, that's not normal, because you act like you're hesitant to be, you're scared of or something like that, and it's still reinforcing that fear of black people as well. And things like that. So it's just, how have you found it since like after the protest? How have people been like approaching you?
I mean, I had a lot of people like sort of reaching out to me and saying, you know, sort of thank you for performing at the protest, and, you know, your poetry really sort of put things into perspective for me, and that kind of stuff. And I suppose the people that I surround myself with are very aware of all this kind of stuff. So, you know, I didn't really, you know, and I mean, I'm not going out that much, so I'm kind of like, you know, it's I maybe not noticed like that much change in terms
Mm-hmm.
of how people are with me, but I have kind of noticed maybe a little bit more recognition when I'm walking down the street, just in terms of, because people are reading all this stuff about Black
Mm-hmm.
trauma every day. So of course, when they see a Black person, you know, you could see the little flicker behind their
Mm-hmm.
eyes that maybe they, you know, are sort of associating seeing you with something that they've, you know, have absorbed of recent and that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. So
Yeah, it's an odd one.
mhm.
Just a quick question with regards to race. Do you, obviously that you've said you haven't experienced like much of a black side or anything, do you assign to either race or anything like that, or do you just assign purely to mixed race?
um,
Because I feel like with my mixed race peers, it's kind of like they choose, it's like they feel like they have to choose, or they kind of assign more to like the black side or the white side and things like that.
yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. It's like, you know, culturally I'm Scottish, but being Scottish isn't synonymous with being white. Do you know what I mean? So,
Mm-hmm.
and I suppose, like, you know, when I'm talking about myself, sometimes for the sake of argument, I'll refer to myself as Black, because I'm I am seen in the eyes of most people as looking like a light-skinned Black person. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like obviously a lot, you know, like a lot of Black people who'd see me, they would know instantly I was mixed race. There'd be no sort of qualms
Yeah.
about it. But for white people, you know, just that it's that one drop rule. It's like that, you know, one drop of Black blood and you are Black. So sometimes, you know, if I'm talking about certain experiences I've had, I'll be like, you know, I'll sort of refer to myself as Black, just because my experience is more similarly aligned to Black people's than
Mm-hmm.
to white people, in terms of experiencing racism. But I
Yeah.
do very much see myself as mixed ethnicity. Like my dad is white. I have three white
Mm-hmm.
brothers, you know. So I very much identify with both parts. I think maybe when I was younger, there was more of a battle of not knowing where I stood. But now I'm
Yeah.
much more, you know, comfortable. Just yeah, I'm both. I'm of many different heritages. So yeah,
And that's the thing that I think that like, because I've got a mixed race son myself, so I'm very much like, I hope that he understands that he is two cultures blended and he's
mm-hmm.
two races blended. And it's one of those things of like, even I don't want him to have to feel a divide that my
Yeah,
peers have felt, and like obviously you might have felt and things like that. It's kind of like, how do we get to that point that even society doesn't divide us and divide mixed race people, because them as a race need to be recognized, because
yeah,
mixed race could be anything. It could be black and white, black and Asian, black and anything. Like even Asian
exactly.
and white. Like it's literally, it could be anything. Even in a sense of you saying that your mum's Bayesian and Trinidadian, that's a
Yeah,
mix. Like
exactly.
there's such a broad thing that they shouldn't be like, oh no, you're black just because you look black, and
Mm-hmm,
that's it.
exactly. And that's why these sort of racial classifications are so arbitrary. Like they're so ridiculous, because there's such a, you know, when you talk about white people, but there's such a wide range of white people across the
Mm-hmm.
globe. There's such a wide range of people who would be classified under Black. Like it doesn't, I think, you know, these terms have just been used to kind of, well, they originated in the onset of slavery to
Mm-hmm.
divide people very specifically. And I think now we need to be looking at sort of other ways of defining ourselves. Sort of once we gain that recognition of the
Yeah.
Black struggle, sort of after that, I think one of the things that needs to come is a recognition of the diversity
Mm-hmm.
within all racial categories.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because it's one of those things that I think a lot of people, when they like meet you and speak to you as a black person, they just think that me as an East African can answer for the West and the North and the South, and I'm gonna
yeah,
like, and I'm like, our cultures are so different. How we do things down in the East is not going to be the same to them, and vice versa. And
exactly.
even when you get over to the Caribbean, that's a whole different form
Mm-hmm.
of culture. So we can't even begin to answer for that one either.
Exactly.
It's,
Like we're not monolithic in that way. It's like there's 54 countries in Africa. Like how could
I
you ever,
know.
any of them would be, there might be similarities, but you know, it's such a massive continent, such a big population.
Mhm.
You're not going to get, you know, the same results across the board.
Yeah, it's really, really scary. Like it's not scary, but it's a bit like what can we do? Like I
Yeah.
can't answer to everyone, and I can't answer for
Hmm.
everyone for that. Um, how have I haven't asked that one. So how did you get involved in your poetry? Because when I heard you at the protest, I was literally just like, wow. Like, and you know
Oh,
when that
thank
you say is like some of the things you were saying, and like, because I write poems myself, so it's one of those things like sometimes when you were saying things that I was like, I felt it, And there was
Yeah.
just times I was like, there was one point I was just sitting, and I've got a video that I've like recorded of you, and you can just hear me like, yes, like in the
Amazing.
background, like proper just spewing it. And I was like, oh, just in my feeling. But yeah, how did you get to that point? Who inspired you? What inspired you?
So I started writing. I didn't really see myself as writing poetry. Like I always enjoyed writing when I was young. And then I kind of just left it behind throughout my sort of teenage years. I struggled with my mental health a lot throughout my teenage years. And when I was around 19, I just remember being very, very depressed. And I had this notebook and I just started writing. And since then, I've never really looked back as using it for a vehicle for my self-expression. And then I've kind of just grown from there, and I sort of started to realize I was like, oh, if I give this a title, this is a poem, and that sort of thing. And then, so I've probably been writing for about 7 years now, but I only started performing last April or
Oh,
last March,
really?
actually. Yeah. I'm quite fresh on the scene, so
No, you like performed with such vim as well. It was like,
oh,
wow, she's
thank
been doing
you,
this a long time.
thank you.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, nah, she's on it.
Yeah.
Like,
No, thank you. But yeah, I just, I shared it with my friends and stuff. And they used to tell me, they were like, you need to perform this, you need to perform it. But I had such low self-confidence that I was just like, I can't do it. I cannot get on that stage. Like, no way. And then one of my friends was putting on a show, and she was like, please, like do a sort of poetry performance. And that was me. After that, I just got offered sort of more and more gigs after that. So yeah, it's been a kind of roller coaster of a year.
yeah.
So I took part in the BBC Words First like poetry competition, and I got published through that. And so it's been really great. Sort of the last
That's
year
really
has just
good.
been, yeah.
That's been amazing. Because even I never told anyone I read poetry, and even like at the protest, it was the first time I'd ever done anything. And then one of my sisters phoned me because my sister's down south, and she phoned me and she was like, when did you start doing this? Like, how long have you been doing it? And I was like, oh, it's just a thing I do. Like,
Yeah,
and it's one
totally.
of those things that I think because you write them down, you just like I've literally got them in my notes for on my phone. So I think you just forget they're there, and you just go back to them every so often. It's one of those like, I've just not got around to it. I've not got time for it.
Yeah,
But
totally. Yeah, it's such a
good on
personal
you for doing
thing.
it.
Oh,
Yeah, and I
thank
think that's what it is.
you.
Mine are very personal that I'm like, yeah, I'm not sharing that. Like,
Yeah, totally.
how has poetry, like, obviously you said it helped with your mental health and stuff. How has that like really developed your psyche, and how has it made you come into one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that sort of, if you pen things up, it will just manifest in other ways. And I think
Hmm.
it allowed me to kind of articulate myself and kind of just feel heard as well. Like, particularly since I've started performing, I'd say my mental health has improved tenfold just because I feel like I'm being listened to. And that's so
Hmm.
much, I think, the experience of being a person of color in a white majority country is that you feel invisible a lot of the time. You
Hmm.
feel like you're just not, you either feel invisible or you feel overly visible. It's this weird sort of
Yeah,
paradox. And I think poetry kind of allowed me to sort of, just express myself, which is, I think it's so important to do. Like everybody needs a vehicle for that.
yeah. And it's one of those things of like, even after you performed, it was like you could see the relief that came out of you for just getting the words out. And it's like
Yeah.
I feel like you notice it a lot when poets like perform their like art and stuff like that. As soon as they're done, and that's probably where the mic drop comes from, because they're like, ah, like
Yeah,
I got it
I'm
out.
done.
It's out of my system. That's it there. But
Hmm.
yeah, man, good on you. Because
Oh,
even like one of those things of like I've been following your posts and stuff like that, and some of the things you've read, and even when I was on your website, I was looking up some of your poetry, and it's just everyone check out her website. That's one thing I do advise.
oh,
Check it
thank you.
out, have a look, and have a read. There was one poem that you have called Skin Inferiority, and it discusses the hierarchy of skin color. Um, how do you feel like as a mixed race woman? Do you feel like you've either been given privileges for being mixed race, or have you had disadvantages? Like how does that poem tie in with your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think on a systematic level, there's undeniably I've had massive privileges because that's the way racism as a system works. It's that the closer in proximity you are to whiteness, the more you will be rewarded for it. And
Hmm.
my mom is like, she's a dark skinned black woman, and even growing up, I would notice the way, people would sort of speak to me differently from how they would speak to her. And, I was recently in Barbados with my mum, and like the colorism there is so extreme. It's unreal. Like, people be shouting mulatto at me in the street. Like,
What does that mean?
It means, so mulatto is like a sort of, it comes from like the old American South, and it means sort of a mixed race person, basically.
Okay.
And so, and they're sort of using these old like slave terms to describe me, and I could really see the kind of worship of lighter skin there, and it made me feel massively uncomfortable. Because my mom is, she's the closest person to me, and she's a dark-skinned woman, and just to see, even in just those little ways, how people speak to me differently, it causes me a lot of pain, because I can see how it's affecting her. So that just makes me even more passionate about what I do, because I'm like, you're like, it's so unfair. The system that we live in is so unjust.
And it's one of those things that, like, the hierarchy of skin color it's mad. It's so confusing and so stupid and so ununderstandable, because look at how far racism has come, that it's now affected its point within the Black community, that now we have colorism, which essentially is people like myself, dark skinned. Say if I was to start picking on you for being light skinned, or you picked on me for being dark skinned, like that's literally how it works. And even me, I'm middle skinned, so there's people that are darker than me, and like, it's just mad. And even one of those things of like, even when you're like going back home, you'll see that like lighter skinned people have like better jobs, and they're more front of house and things like that. And it's like, this was taught to us. This behavior has generally been passed down through the generations of slaves. And even that when you look back at like slaves and plantations, that the mixed race people or the light skinned people went on and were the house slaves. So they were good enough to work in the house. Like, yes, they were still slaves, but they worked in the house, and they were doing the front of face stuff, like receptionist stuff, greeting customers and things like that. But then the darker ones, the darker you are, the worse job you get.
Exactly. It's that whole house slave, field slave dynamic. And I think when you sort of look at the ways in which, when they started to so-called abolish slavery, which didn't happen for a long time after they said it happened, they would give all the sort of lighter skinned people the jobs in the banks, the jobs in sort of government positions, etc. So it's like, that's how you have this same situation being represented over and over, where light-skinned people experience so much privilege in contrast to their darker counterparts.
It's so messed up. And like, I've even had, like, there's times like I've been out with like my friends that are lighter skinned and whatever, and it's just weird how this shift of like people's attitude and how they treat you changes. And it's like, it's a mad dynamic to be in, because sometimes you will literally be there, and because you're a darker skinned girl, people won't talk to you. But the light skinned girl will literally have like everyone talking to them. Even if they want to ask you something, they'll be like, oh, ask your friend this. And it comes from both men and women. And it's like, because I'm darker, I'm more of a fearful person, or things like that. The lighter person is going to be sweeter and more sweet natured, like the white woman's sweet natured. And things like that. It's such a scary perspective to have, and it's a shame that it goes on within our community, because sometimes I'm like, can't you see that this is what they've done?
Totally. And I think the sort of whole image of beauty being seen as sort of, the lighter the better, essentially. And when I was in Barbados, I heard men say things like, I wouldn't go out with a woman who's darker than me. And, this mentality is like ingrained, like it's seriously ingrained. And that's what happens when you have the same trauma inflicted over and over for hundreds of years. Like, it will take a long time to unpick all of that. This isn't going to just change overnight, unfortunately. Like, these are mentalities which have been ingrained within us.
But it's really like, it's still very, very representative in terms of like the media. And when you watch like Black TV shows and stuff like that, there'll be like a dark-skinned dad with a light-skinned mum, or a dark-skinned mum with a light-skinned dad. It's never dark and light and light. There's always the contrast. And then it's just like, if you're not going to represent us properly in our media, because I watch TV and there is a dark-skinned like and a light-skinned parent, but in my house they're both dark-skinned, so it's not representative to all households or all Black people that are like around.
No, not at all.
Your other poem, You've got another poem on the website called "O Flower of Scotland," and
Hmm.
there was a couple lines that I loved. So there was one that you said, "You'll overstep my boundaries, but then again, you've been doing that for centuries," which I thought was like, might drop that one. Like, I love that line. Um, where did that inspiration come from? Because it's one of those things of anyone that knows "O Flower of Scotland," it's the thistle, it's this pride of Scottish like culture, and there's a song about it and stuff like
Yeah.
that. So your twist on it, where did that come from?
Yeah, so it kind of came from, I think there's this kind of idea that Scotland's this sort of racial utopia where racism doesn't happen. It's in some way
Hmm.
exempt from that. And I sort of wanted to write a poem that was kind of reflective of that view and really kind of highlighted, because I speak a lot about racism within a more global context, and I kind of wanted to kind
Hmm.
of bring it home. And the sort of, you'll overstep my boundaries, you've been doing that for centuries, is Scotland had an integral part within the slave trade, which is sort of now being more acknowledged. But I think
Hmm.
because Scotland was colonised and there's this kind of rift between Scotland and England, this sort of rivalry thing, that people kind of see it as, well, they colonised us, and so whatever, we're not the aggressors in these situations.
Hmm.
But Scotland played a massive role within the slave
It is.
trade.
Scotland was heavily involved, like heavily, heavily involved.
Mm-hmm.
The guy that we had on last week, we were actually talking about like a lot of like the links with his link to Scottish slavery and stuff like that. And he's same as you, Caribbean heritage. And yeah, it was when we were doing the research, we found out that 1 in 5 captains of every ship around the world that went to go and collect slaves and transport slaves and stuff was a Scottish was a Scottish captain. And it's like one in
Wow.
five is that's a lot of population.
That's a lot. Yeah. That's a
It's
lot,
when you look at it
definitely.
that
Especially
perspective,
considering
it's
the
a
sort
lot.
of,
Considering how
mm-hmm,
small Scotland is in
definitely,
comparison to
yeah.
England, how small it is in comparison to the
Yeah.
world, for them to have 1 in 5 people, like with pretty much every son and their uncle, was working on the
Mm-hmm.
ship. And even like Scottish people had such a
Exactly.
massive role within these ships. There were doctors, there were nurses, there were chefs, like they were doing things to make sure the slaves got there okay. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
yes, you kept them alive, but you kept them alive to be sold and to
Yeah,
be
exactly.
like it's
Exactly.
like, please, where's the niceness in that? Like, where is the
Mm-hmm.
logic? Um, you were also involved in a production called The Lamont for Sheku Bayoh. Who did this? How did you get involved? And explain to the viewers just what it was and what it was about.
Yeah, so the play was written by a Scottish poet. She's mixed race as well, called Hannah Lavery. She's absolutely amazing. And she wrote this play about Sheku Bayoh, and it's called The Lament because it's these three characters who are sort of three women lamenting over his death and sort of exploring the kind of different facts surrounding his death, but also the way that Scotland kind of the way that it viewed his death, like the way the sort of the kind of narrative was kind of sold to Scottish people about who Sheku Bayoh
Mm-hmm.
was. So yeah, it was done at the Lyceum Theatre, directed by David Gregg, and it was like a work in progress play. So we were hoping to actually do it again this year at the
Mm-hmm.
Fringe, but unfortunately, obviously that can't happen. But we got really good reviews, really good kind of feedback, and I think they were saying, I don't know how accurate this is, but it's maybe the only play sort of, well, that's been recorded in Scotland with an all black, mixed race or black female cast, and
Mm-hmm.
a mixed race writer as well. So
Mm-hmm.
it was me and two other women who played the lamenters. So yeah, it was a very, very emotionally taxing experience. Like, I loved it so much, but it was
Mm-hmm.
just it was very painful because we're talking about this man's death. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was yeah, emotionally taxing, but a very necessary piece of work.
Yeah,
And sort of
and I feel
highlights
like
the
if
sort
it
of,
was this year, it would be a blow up. Like it
yeah,
needed it.
exactly. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but we'll see, maybe next year. So
Hopefully, when I was like doing the research on it, there was a lot of like quite a few reports, and they were very much in praise of the work you guys
hmm,
did, and they were saying how like even a lot of the people reporters were like it was like an eye opener, and it was like
hmm,
a thing to be like we didn't actually look at it from this perspective and
yeah,
things like that, which I think is the common theme that everyone is like everyone that's not experienced racial abuse is the common theme that they're like, wow, like they're having to look through it and be like, okay, so because you said it in that way, and it was one of those things that a lot of the responses we got back from the speakers at the protest was like, when I heard such and such speak or whoever, like I didn't realize the actual effect and the damage and the internal
Mm-hmm.
damage that it causes and the trauma that it causes. And I'm like, just because something happened when you were 5, 6, or 7 doesn't mean when you're in your 20s or 30s, it's not going to still be with you. Because when you have your
Yeah,
children, you're going to know that, like, you're going to think about your children, and be like, okay, so when I was in school, this happened. So how do I protect them against it happening to them in
exactly.
school? And it's just a vicious cycle that we're all in. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but with regards to Sheku Bayoh, you did your dissertation on the media's response to his death.
Yeah.
Um, what were your findings?
So, so I'll give a sort of brief overview of his of the events surrounding his death. So it was May 3rd, 2015. Sheku had been at a friend's house. He had consumed some stimulant drugs, and he left in the early hours of the morning, maybe like sort of 5, 6 in the morning. And he was walking down a street in Kirkcaldy, and the police had been alerted to reports that there was a black man walking about the street with a knife. Now, it's kind of disputed as to whether he had a knife or, I mean, I think personally he was probably experiencing some sort of paranoia attack induced by the drugs or something. And
Mm-hmm.
so the 9 police officers arrived on the scene, which is quite heavy-handed for, one man. 9 police officers arrived on the
Yeah.
scene, and within around 30 seconds, he was on the ground, and 2 police officers who had a combined weight of 43 stones sat on him. So he essentially was like crushed to death.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that it was sort of portrayed by the police initially, they said that he'd been that he had attacked a white female officer, and that he had they had to restrain him because of that, and then he had died. So my findings essentially were based on critical discourse analysis. So I went through the police statements and also the press reports surrounding his death, and what I found was that the police had heavily relied on this use of colonial stereotypes and archetypes of black men in order to kind of justify their use of excessive force against him. And, there was all these kind of assumptions about sort of him not being able to feel pain. And, we know from a lot of research which has been done is that there's this idea that black people do not feel pain. This obviously comes from the slave trade as a way to justify the fact that these slaves are being worked to death. So a very old stereotype. Also, just that they played on this idea of him being this monstrous black man. The police officers said, he was the biggest man I'd ever seen. That's a direct quote. He wasn't even the biggest man who was present at the scene. One of the police officers that sat on him was 6'4". Sheku Bayoh was only 5'10", weighs about 11, 12 stone. He's not a really big guy by any standards. And the sort of thing that kept being repeated by the police was he attacked a petite female officer. And as we know from looking at sort of old colonial records, and even more recently as well, there's this idea that black men are a specific threat to white women. And this was used during the slave trade to keep white women in their place as much as anything else. It was used as a tool of white male patriarchy to go, look, these, the N-word, these are going to come and get you. Do you know what I mean? That's what it was used for. And so I also looked at other cases of black deaths in police custody, and it's frightening actually how much they follow this very similar narrative of excessive force, and sort of after the event, demonization in the press. After that, they'll announce some sort of public inquiry, and they will suspend officers with full pay. Often the officers get retired with full pay. There's been over 1,000, I want to say 1,700 now, or maybe 1,600 deaths in police custody. Around a third of them have been people of color, and there has not been one conviction of an officer, which just, and that's 1,600 deaths within the last 25 years. So that's
Yeah.
not even, that's a lot to like,
Yeah.
when you look at it that way, and for there to have been no convictions whatsoever. And so what essentially happened is the police released all these statements, and then the press took these statements and ran with them. They basically said that he was involved in genocide in Sierra Leone. They said that he was a potential terrorist threat. They said that he was a domestic abuser. They said he was a possessive partner. They tried to link him with some criminal activity in Fife. They even asked his family what his diet was like to try and ascertain whether they could make a link with him being a Muslim or not.
Really?
Try and find out if he ate halal meat, essentially, so they could try and link him to that kind of threat. And the police kept sort of referring to the fact that they were terrified because he was they associated him with the Lee Rigby case. I don't know if you remember that, the sort of terrorist threat, and the soldier was murdered, etc. And it's sort of like, you can't really, like, just because this has happened once, like, you can't then apply that to all Black men that you encounter. And I think the problem is that now they're saying that there's going to be a sort of public inquiry, but I read it's November 2019 they announced there was going to be a public inquiry. And I recently saw in the news just the other day that the family have said that they've been told the inquiry could take about 4 years. So this, again, same pattern of the way the police uses these specific tactics to, they're hoping to drag out this inquiry, because people run out of legal funds and all that kind of stuff, drag it out as much as they can, and then in the hope that people forget about it. This has been done over and over again. Mark Duggan, Joy Gardner, I mean, the list goes on in terms of Black people who've died due to excessive force in police custody.
It's so mad that, like, they literally pulled every string they could to be like, we just want to prove he's dangerous. Just because he's Black already, we want to prove he's dangerous and we want to prove he's such a bad man. And it's one of those things that, like, I don't know, I have no words for it. I think because it happens so close to home, it hits a little bit harder. And I just remember when it happened, it was really awkward being a Black person in Scotland. Like, it was. And even just going about the street, like, the way the police would look at you funny, and, like, even just people in general, like, it was a tension, and the tension was there, and it was very much felt, and you could feel it was there. But I don't get how they're going to commission it to be in 4 years' time when it's already been 5 years prior to his death. Like, it's been 5 years already, and they only opened it up because of the protesting and things like that. If this never happened, it would have still went swept under the rug.
Yeah,
it's such a shame for his family.
Yeah, it's so brutal. And one of the things which they often do in these cases, and I think they've started to do this with the sort of George Floyd case as well, is they sort of blame it on a rotten apple. So then we had all that stuff come out in the press in around sort of 2017, I think it was, where they started to say that one of the officers involved in the case with Sheku Bayoh was a racist and it was all his fault. And they will often take one officer whilst retiring them on full pay and make them the scapegoat. So it's this same pattern over and over again. And it just shows you how deeply, deeply corrupt our institutions are, that they're able to get away with this, and there's no kind of recourse for their actions.
It's a scary world that we live in. Like, it literally is a very scary world that we live in. And it's one of those things, like, even with that police officer that they took the blame, do you think they must have sat him down and be like, so you need to just take one for the team? Like,
Totally. And I mean, there's been so much research into how deeply, deeply corrupt the police as an institution are. There was the McPherson report, the whole sort of scandal with the whole Stephen Lawrence case, and this is a known issue, but it just doesn't gain the kind of notoriety that it deserves because it implicates very, very powerful people who have a vested interest in keeping their sort of systems of power kind of mystified in that way, so that we don't really realize the way that the police operates. And I mean, even the way, you know, if you make a complaint to the police, it will be dealt with by the IPCC, the Independent Police Complaints Commission, which is made up of ex-officers. That's who they employ, are ex-police officers. So you've got the police institution being investigated by ex-officers, which to me is like, that's
It's
not
full corruption.
yeah, that's not like an objective kind of force that's looking into these cases at all. And then you wonder why nobody ever gets convicted. You know.
Nah, Police Scotland is very mad. Like, I remember, like, I had in one of like my old flats that I used to live in, this neighbor, like, she just would make my life so difficult as a black person living there. And she was just constant every day. Like, even if I like got up and went to the toilet, she'd bang my roof because I was making too much noise in the night walking, and like just everything. But like with my ex, because he was white at the time, she would talk to him so nicely, and she'd be like, "Hi," like proper best friends with him, and like she would just always argue with me. She would just do certain things, and to the point it was at like it got that bad to a point where I generally was like, "If you're not gonna leave me alone and let me just live my life, I'm gonna have to phone the police." Phone the police, and they were like, "We'll just leave it between you guys. It's a neighbour's dispute. That's all it is." And then there was one point that I was moving house, and so I eventually got a new house, moved and whatever, and I was moving house, just mind my own business, like loading the van, and then she started trying to fight me, and I was like, "I'm leaving. Like, I am literally, you don't have to see me again. Why are you trying to fight me? Like, I'm leaving, whatever." And then because I wouldn't fight her, she phoned the police and was like, "My neighbour's been really aggressive towards me."
Oh my God.
And like, the police came. So like, as soon as she phoned the police came and whatever, and they didn't even like try and question me and ask me anything. They were about to handcuff me. I was like, "What?" Are you like? No, I was like, "I've not done anything. I'm just trying to move house. Like, it's not for you to do this to me." And it wasn't until like at this point they literally put the box out my hand, had me handcuffed, everything, walking me to the car, and even the removal men were like, "She didn't do anything." Like everyone was saying like she didn't do anything, and it took a couple of my neighbors had to come out and be like, "No, this woman has victimized her from the day she's lived in the house."
That's
And
ridiculous.
until those people came out and like it was like a bunch of white faces that they had to believe. And that was it. But like until those people came out being like, "No, we have seen her doing whatever." And one of my neighbors, God bless them, had recorded the interaction because she
Right.
was like, "We know that she does it all the time and whatever." So one of my neighbors had actually recorded it, and you can see she's like trying to aggravate a fight because like as I'm like moving her box, she's pushing the boxes over like proper in my face, like trying to spark a reaction. And if that wasn't recorded and shown to them, I would have been in the cell.
Yeah.
And it was the fact that like even when the police came, I was like, "You didn't even give me a chance to say anything. You just literally said, 'I'm arresting you and aggravating assault.'" And I was like, "What am I being arrested for? I've not done fuck all. Like,
Yeah.
it's not on me." But since then, it's been one of those things of like, I don't think I would ever, 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 as a black person, try and gain help from them and gain. If their job is to protect us as people and citizens living here, if I have a burgundy passport, I can. That's my citizenship right. Do you know what I mean? As a British
Yeah.
citizen, that's my right to phone police. But as a black citizen, I don't have that right
Yeah.
because police don't want to help black people.
Exactly. And it's like, you know, the sort of criminalization of black bodies goes back so far and is so sort of entrenched within our minds and our societies. And you know, I read this study you know, and it sort of speaks to like, you know, people saying, "Oh, was death a factor in Sheku Bayoh's death?" It's like, of course it was, because race is one of the foundations which builds this world. So of course it was a factor. You know, and there's been this study done about sort of implicit and unconscious bias, and it asks people of all races. And it tests their fear responses with people holding fruit and people holding guns. And consistently, people of all races showed a higher fear response to black people holding fruit than to white people holding guns. You know, so it's like, what does that say
Wow.
about the world?
That's very shocking.
Yeah, and about how we, everybody internalizes that anti-blackness. And, you know, you can travel the world and there is a global stereotype of black people being violent, being stupid, being criminals, you know, name it, anything negative. You know, that exists. Literally. It doesn't matter. You go to Southeast Asia, there's that stereotype of black people. You go to India, you go to, you know, wherever it is, you will find that stereotype. It is so pervasive. And I think people don't really realize how brainwashed we all are. It's brainwashing. You know, we are all human at the end of the day, yet we have all these assumptions and ideas about what people are going to be like based on the color of their skin. Like that's brainwashing. And I don't believe for any second this is by accident. And I don't believe either that the people who are in power, they do this because they hate Black people. I don't think it's as simple as that. They do it because of power and control and access to resources. And Africa is the most resource rich continent on the globe, so they have a vested interest in sort of keeping Black people down in that sense.
Have you seen you know about Jane Elliott because of sociology,
Yeah.
but have you seen, she's a queen, love her,
Yeah.
like I honestly love her hands down. She does the dolls test with the kids, and it shows how kids are being brainwashed to think that like Black people are bad compared to like white people and stuff like that. And it is, I remember watching it when I was like starting off like doing my sociology in college, and I remember watching it being like, why does the Black kid think the doll's black, like bad, and why do they think that? And it was such a shame when you like see the results that she comes up with, and she's like, due to systematic racism and just general taught ideas and behaviors, we're brought up to believe that if you're of darker skin, you're gonna have worse behavioral habits, just so many more negatives. Like you're just gonna be bad behavior, angry, aggressive, like naughty little kids and stuff like that. And it's just, for little kids to already have that, it shows how brainwashed they are. And like even in a sense of, I make it a point to get my son a color of each doll when he's got his like toys and stuff, because I'm like, I don't want him having that hierarchy or having that like mentality towards them or anything.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think they say by the age of like, I think it's around 3 or 4, you have already internalized the racial hierarchy and you know your place within it. And I mean, my mom used to buy me Black Barbies when I was little. I didn't want to play with them. I did not want to play with them. And it wasn't like I was consciously thinking that doll is black and I don't want to play with it. I just wanted to play with the white Barbies because I'd already internalized that black was below white, and so and that's from a young age. Yeah.
And it's a standard of beauty that you get taught, because even when I gave like my son, because my son is at when boys go for the stage of wanting Barbies and stuff like that, so he's in that stage. So when I gave him his first one, I gave him a black one. He was like, "Mommy, where's the white one?" And I was like, "You see, you're already expecting it. Like, you're not getting it yet." Like, and just I remember for like the first few days, he kept saying like, "Is the white one here yet? Is she coming? Is she here yet?" And I was like, at 3, they've already got that little psyche developed, and I'm trying my hardest. Like, as a Black mother, I'm really trying.
Totally.
It's scary to watch that.
Yeah, definitely. It is. It's just so pervasive. It's frightening, and I think it's going to take a long time to undo all of this indoctrination. Like I don't believe it will go away overnight, unfortunately.
I think it's going to be a good few decades of change, but hopefully it's good change anyway. You pretty much covered most of my questions for the Sheku Bayoh one. I did want to ask, if you were doing your dissertation now, given the current climate, is there any changes in how Scotland's portraying this case along with the Black Lives Matter news?
Yeah, I mean,
so do you think,
like as in because of Black Lives Matter, there would have been more of a focus on that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, I think because I have seen the sort of there's been sort of more petitions and stuff started in terms of Sheku Bayoh and trying to get a sort of fair public inquiry into his death and all this kind of stuff. But I mean, I even saw in the news the other day about Amar Anwar, who's the lawyer in the Bayoh case. In the Sun newspaper, which in my dissertation, the Sun was the main culprit 90% of the time. Like,
always.
They are like, they're just liars. They're just complete fabrications. And they said that Amar Anwar has used Black Lives Matter as a way to insult the police and use it as a slur against them and all this kind of stuff. And it's just like, what? Like, surely during this movement we should be highlighting these certain cases of injustice, which Sheku Bayoh clearly was. But yet the press are still going on that ideological offensive of trying to demonize anybody who's trying to bring awareness to that. It's
a mad world, and I feel like if it had happened now, it would have got a mad recognition, but at the same time, it shouldn't have to be that. It shouldn't have to be that because of the current climate of the world that is only being recognised. It should be a case of, no, this is wrong and what happened was wrong.
Yeah.
And we need to investigate it. Because even if that was a white man, they would have, hands down, they would have found that guy who did it in 2 days. And be like, straight away, that was him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's just
definitely, and it's the way that race is used as this sort of the sort of as an excuse for like the reason why that person was behaving the way they were is, well, it must be because of their skin color. The reason why Sheku Bayoh was supposedly being aggressive is because he was black. It's those links that they try and make in this sort of really kind of subtle underhand way, and sometimes not so subtle. But yeah, I think it's just I don't know how we're going to move past where we are now in terms of the Sheku Bayoh thing, because the police is such a closed circuit, like we were saying with the IPCC investigating all complaints against the police. It's sort of how do you go about trying to bring justice to something when the system itself is so morally defunct? Like, how do you go around kind of getting justice?
And it falls in line with, like, even if you were to take it to like a second party or a third party, it's like, but what information is getting passed over and what are they keeping within the files? And I don't think we'll ever get to the end of it unless they release all files and be like, right, there's transparency in whatever. But then, is it full transparency, or is it just what the government wants us to know, or what everyone wants us to know? Because look at how we've been educated. Look at our actual education system. That's the biggest fight we've got right now, in a sense of why haven't we been taught it and stuff like that. And it makes you actually realise the government will only teach you what they want you to know. The government will only expose what they think is worth exposing.
Exactly. And it's like, with the Sheku Bayoh case, it's like his injuries were consistent with somebody who has been asphyxiated. They weren't consistent with somebody who had taken a drug overdose, and yet the police are still trying to push that narrative. The right-wing press, particularly, or right-leaning press, are still trying to push that narrative that it was because of drugs, or he was a long-held drug user and all this kind of stuff. And even though his injuries are consistent with asphyxiation, they're not consistent with somebody who's died from some sort of issue or complication related to drugs. But they will just barefaced lie to you in that way. Like we're told so much stuff that just is completely inaccurate, and they rely on the fact that people do not question the government. They rely on that that we are kind of very much dependent and reliant on this system. And I think they kind of just rely on the fact that people often won't take action unless they're directly impacted by something.
Yeah, and that is very much the case in the fact of when the media was putting out whatever about his death at the time, it was very much a case of like, let's just see until it dies down and then see what reaction we get after that. And it's one of those things of, because the black community is not big enough, or we have no voice here, like, it's one of those things of, because people in power aren't saying anything, we're not going to deal with it. But like, it's the fact that we haven't got the access to be in power. We haven't got the access to get into the Houses of Parliament or anything like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you only have to look at, like, the people who run this country. Most of them went to the same school. Like, how can you think that this is like a fair and just society? Like, that most of them went to like the same universities, same schools. Like, I mean, it is ridiculous. Like, when you actually think about it, like how corrupt the world is. Like, I don't think we will get real justice without like a total systemic overhaul in that way.
Quick question, actually. You went to Edinburgh Uni, so how did you find that as a mixed race person? Was there like institutional racism, systematic? Like, how was that?
Yeah, it was challenging, very, very challenging. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I actually didn't attend very much. Because I felt the racial battle fatigue of going in every day and being within those walls. And Edinburgh Uni's a funny one, because it's like, I mean, I don't know, like, feels like a vast majority of their students are white and from the south of England, and either middle class or upper middle class. Like it's very elitist. And also I went to uni, I started uni when I was 21. So I didn't move into halls. I didn't have that kind of immersive university experience. I was very much a kind of outlier. And so, I mean, my experience there, I heard people, for example, in a classroom one day, we were talking about Africa, colonialism. It was up for a course called Empires. And this guy who was South African actually said in front of the class, he was like, well, the people from the Congo are just a different breed, you know, and that's, you're just
Wow.
like, what? It's like, you know,
Wow.
just a sheer kind of ignorance from where that's coming from. And, you know, from a white South African man, you know, who clearly doesn't know how he got to the continent in the
But the
first
thing
place.
is, with
Do you know
white
what
South
I mean?
Africans, they are there because of colonization.
Exactly.
They're not indigenous.
Yeah,
They're not, they weren't there originally, so they're only there because of colonization. They're from the Dutch lands. That's your place.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, I had in my, I think it was my first or second year, there was a professor who's a senior lecturer in sociology, and he told a room full of 200 to 250 students that there's no such thing as real, you know, systematic racism in the UK. It simply doesn't exist, and that it is often just perceived by Black people to exist. It's not actually real or tangible. And I remember just sitting there and I was like, oh my God, you know, in a hall full of white students, of course, you know, who are being told by somebody who's, you know, supposedly an intellectual that actually there's not really any such thing as racism. It doesn't really exist. And I think
And they're gonna go home and think that's fact.
Yeah, and these are the people that are going to go into probably high-powered positions, and yet they have been told that there's no such thing as racism. So, you know, it's yeah, I mean, I was beyond shocked. I considered writing a letter, but I just thought, you know what, I can't even be dealing with this right now. Like,
Sometimes
you know,
you're like, I can't come and die to explain to everyone about themselves. Like, it's not in me.
exactly, exactly. And yeah, I think the sort of experience of being at Edinburgh Uni is very, I think unless you fit within that very kind of small section of society, you're not going to fit in there. You know, it's very sort of, it was very challenging just on a kind of day-to-day basis, just being around people who were so privileged. Like, you know, the things you'd hear people talking about is a whole nother realm. Like, you know, I've never met people who have that kind of money. Like, none of my friends, I don't have that kind of money. None of my friends have that kind of money. You know, to be around that was really, really overwhelming.
Did you find that a lot of them expected you to not be a Scottish citizen, and they expected you to be from down south?
Yeah, yeah. I actually had that. I remember on my first day, like everyone was waiting outside the sort of lecture hall, and you know, it's because it's like the sort of first proper day. People obviously want to make friends, and this girl came up to me. She's like, "Oh hi, like how's it going?" And I was like, "Oh hi." And I think she maybe thought I was like from London or something, and I was like, "No, I'm from Edinburgh." And you know, she was kind of just like, "Oh," and just walked away from me. And I think it's kind of not seen as cool to go to uni in your home city. Like, I don't know if
I remember one time I went to like there was like an Edinburgh University like event, and it was like it looked so lit. It was like a carnival type of like Brixton rave thing, and I was like, right. So me and a couple of friends went to it, and when we went, they were like, "Oh, so what area of London are you from?" And we were like, "I'm from Nigeria." Like, you know what I mean? Like, we're from like proper Edinburgh. Like, we're not from London. And they were like, "Oh, okay. So are you here studying? Like, what are you doing here?" And I'm like, "No, I grew up here. Like, this is my home."
Yeah,
And
totally.
they're just so confused. But I've got to be cautious of time. I've just got the notification saying we've got a minute remaining. So,
Oh, okay, cool.
yeah, thank you so much
Yeah, thank
for
you.
coming in. This was amazing. You've done really well.
Oh, thank you.
Let everyone know where to find you, and I will tag you in everything. So,
Okay, amazing. So lovely chatting with you. Thank you.
it's been good.
All right, take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.